It was a typical Friday. I got up, took a shower, got dressed, and went to work, where I had several meetings and negotiations. When lunchtime arrived, I looked out the window at the bright Dallas afternoon and decided to walk across the street to the gallery for some food. As I walked through the mall to Potbelly's, I grinned, realizing how much of a slave of habit I had become. Over the past year, I've probably made this walk 3 days a week to eat the same sandwich at the same place. This would not have been the case when I was younger. Then I craved variety. Now that I've found something I really like, a little repetition wasn't a problem. Okay, maybe even a lot. I had just started my first bite when a woman settled into the seat next to me. This caught my attention for two reasons. First, there were several empty seats at the table. Secondly, I specifically chose this place because when I sit, the next seat is very close. This usually means I can enjoy my lunch without distractions. This closeness apparently did not bother this woman, so I began to grab a Coca-Cola and chips. As I did this, she said, "You don't have to move anything for me, John." I turned to get a better look and saw a woman about 170 centimeters tall, weighing about 54 kilograms, with olive skin, shoulder-length light brown hair, and full, soft lips. But it was her light brown eyes that caught my attention, not because of their color, but because they seemed so sad. Looking into those eyes, I asked, "Do I know you?" She smiled softly and shook her head. "No, we've never met before, and frankly, I wish we hadn't met now." What do you say to a beautiful woman you've never met, who deliberately sits next to you and obviously knows you, and then says she wishes you two hadn't met? I had no idea, so I just stared at her silently. She extended her hand. "Sorry for my rudeness. My name is Stella Holmes." We shook hands formally, and she continued, "I won't take up much of your time, but I need to talk to you about an issue that concerns both of us." Turning away from Stella, I involuntarily looked around, hoping to see friends laughing at their own joke, but I didn't notice anyone. Turning to her again, I said, "Stella, I don't know you, so I can't imagine what you might need from me. Maybe it's better if I just leave." As I began to put the half-eaten food back into the paper bag, I felt it lightly touch my hand. "Please, John, give me 10 minutes, and then I'll leave you alone." I should have ignored this stranger and walked away. Damn, looking back, I should have turned and ran as fast as I could, but I didn't. Instead, I stopped fiddling with my food and turned towards her. "Okay, you have 10 minutes, and for dramatic effect, I pressed the timer on my watch." She looked at me, paused long enough to take a deep breath, and with a sad smile said slowly, "John, my husband has been seeing another woman behind my back for 6 months, and that woman is your wife, Sue." The words came to me clearly, but I didn't believe them and told her this. "Stella, I'm very sorry that your husband is cheating on you, but you confused me with someone else. My wife loves me and I love her. We've been married almost 15 years, and I'd bet my life that I'm the only man she's ever known." Stella's eyes became sadder with every word I said. She took a thick brown envelope out of her purse without looking and placed it in front of me, saying, "I'm really sorry, I really am. I know this is hard for you to accept, but I assure you that the other woman is your Sue." Stomped the envelope with her index finger. She said that inside were photographs, a DVD, and a private investigator's report. As I reached for the envelope, she put her hand on my arm. "Please, John, don't watch this until I'm gone, and my advice is don't watch any of this until you've been alone for a few hours. It will take a little time to review the materials, but it will take a lot more to recycle." At this point, I was half angry, half confused, and half scared, so I said a little louder than necessary, "Lady, what the hell is this, and what do you want from me?" I saw her blink at my tone, but she didn't look away. "John, I already told you. Your wife is cheating on me with my husband. What do I want from you?" "Yes, Stella, what the hell do you want from me?" "John, I don't really want anything from you other than forgiveness." I'm confused again. "Stella, if your story is not complete nonsense, Why should I forgive you?" As she began to stand up, she said, "I have given you all the information you need so that you can draw your own conclusions about who needs your forgiveness. But I'll tell you what I wanted from this meeting. First of all, I wanted to tell you this news personally. I owed you that. Secondly, I want your wife out of Justin's life and mine." As she stood up to leave, she leaned towards me and whispered, "I really believe that Sue loves you. So please try to respond to this in a way that you can live with and don't just react to the pain." This was the hardest thing for me, but I hope this will change everything. When she started to walk away, I grabbed her hand. "What are you going to do about your cheating husband?" She gave me a very cold smile and said firmly, "I'm going to run into him on Sunday. After that, he will have a week to convince me that he will never cheat on me again, and we will move out of town by the end of the month. Otherwise, I will leave him without his reputation, his money, or his manhood." When I heard the emotions in her words, I realized that her husband is really in big trouble. While I was trying to decide whether to follow her, she disappeared into the crowd. Turning to the envelope, I began to pick it up when Stella's voice popped into my head, and I realized that I would wait for privacy. At work, I couldn't open the envelope, so I spent the longest day of my life, moving from meeting to meeting, mechanically performing my duties. Neither my thoughts nor my heart were in business. Finally, my last meeting ended and I headed home. Arriving home at 6:30 p.m., I put my briefcase down and went into the bedroom, where I saw Sue watching TV. When she saw me, she jumped up, hugged me tightly, and kissed me on the lips. This is how she greeted me every day since we got married. Looking at me, she smiled and said, "You're early today. What happened?" "Well, the weatherman said the weather was going to be nice for the weekend, so I thought we could head out to the lake early tomorrow. We could go fishing, and then I'd lay down a new tile in the hallway." She playfully replied, "Ah, that sounds fun, but I can't do it tomorrow." "Why, honey? Do you have a date with another man that you can't cancel?" Hitting me lightly on the left shoulder, she laughed and said, "That's such a terrible charge. You know, I volunteer to help with the church's annual auction, and I'll be busy all day. Now apologize." I looked for signs of lies on her face, finding none. I hugged her tightly and whispered my apologies. After dinner, I loaded my fishing gear into the car along with a duffel bag containing work clothes and gloves. Once everything was packed, I went back into the house to watch some TV. Later that night, I had trouble sleeping as dinner kept coming back into my thoughts and the wave of emotions repeated itself over and over again. Around 1 a.m., I noticed that Sue was now clinging to me. As I wondered how this could have happened without noticing it, I felt her hand begin to slide towards my penis. "Are you awake?" she asked in a whisper in my ear. "Yes, too tired to sleep," I muttered in response. "Too tired to sleep?" she laughed. "Is it like being too tired to have sex?" She tried to make love, but because of the thoughts that she could cheat on me, nothing came of it. As I rolled onto my side, I thought to myself, what the hell is going on? I woke up this morning and everything was fine. Now I have a stranger claiming that my wife is a cheater. Still awake at 4 a.m., I gave up, got dressed, and headed to the lake. Before leaving, I looked at my sleeping wife and wondered what was happening and what would happen to us. After a couple of hours of driving, interrupted only by a stop at a gas station and a visit to the McDonald's drive-through window, I arrived at the lake house. Some of my earliest memories are from this house. If you believe the stories, my grandfather designed this house himself and built it with his own hands. My father told me it took 20 years. Even now, years after my parents died, I still expect them to greet me at the door with a smile and a hug. And every time it doesn't happen, I feel a little disappointed. Driving through the gate and up the dirt road, I saw a house that was modest by today's standards. The house, in addition to the obligatory living room and kitchen, had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a game room, and a wraparound porch. But what made this house special was its location on 320 acres near a lake. As I drove up, I saw how soon the sun would appear over the hills, and at that moment my grandfather's house looked like my own personal Shangri-La. After quickly unloading the car, I grabbed a carton of orange juice from the refrigerator, opened the screen door, and walked over to the white rocking chair. I decided that no matter what happened later, I would officially start the day by watching the sun rise. Remembering that morning, the sun painted a breathtaking picture, bringing the hills and water to life with its arrival. I got lost in its quiet beauty. The next thing I remember was waking up with a half-empty carton of warm orange juice on the porch and the sun already high in the sky. After a few minutes of quiet grumbling, I decided it was for the best, since I probably needed some rest to do what I came to do. With that thought in mind, I took a liter bottle of water from the chest and an envelope, which I threw on the dressing table. I brought them both to the dining room table, where I sipped water while pondering the envelope. To hell with it, I grabbed the damned envelope and pulled out a second envelope with a 2-page letter attached to the top. John, I don't know what will be said when I give this to you, so sorry if I repeat myself. My name is Stella Holmes, and my husband Justin Holmes has been dating your wife Susan for the past 6 months. In the second envelope, you will find an edited copy of my private investigator's report, photographs, and an edited DVD. I have divided this material so that you can think before you act. I realize it may be too late, but after this letter, take time to really think about how much you love Sue and what your love has meant to you over the years. I can assure you that the affair is over and no longer threatens your relationship. Now you should focus on the questions. Can you forgive her, and are you ready to fight for your marriage? Please do not open the second envelope until you have found the answers to these questions. No man can avoid seeing hard evidence of his wife's infidelity, but since this is my hope, the duty of convincing you of its truth lies with me, so you won't need to open a second envelope. I witnessed the beginning of their relationship. In fact, I was the reason they met. It started at the Enigma Club. Justin let his ego do the talking for him, playfully boasting that all the ladies wanted him. Tired of his boasts, I finally offered to bet that I could find a woman who didn't want him. He agreed, and I chose your wife. Why? Because I saw her during my previous visit to the club. She wore her wedding ring proudly, came and went with her friends, and although many men asked her to dance, she never accepted. I was sure that she would cool his ardor. Having made a bet and chosen a target, I went to another part of the club and waited for my humiliated husband to find me. 2 hours later, I found him sitting alone with his wife. I introduced myself, and after the initial awkward moment, everyone relaxed. The turning point came 30 minutes later when my husband suggested Sue try an illegal substance. Within minutes of her initial refusal, Justin convinced her to give it a try. At that moment, realizing that Justin would win the bet, I also took the pill. I won't go into all the details. Butsu actually went home with us that night. Maybe it was the mixing of alcohol and illicit substances, and maybe just the realization that we were all being so obscene. Whatever it was, it turned out to be a very intense experience. So much so that when Sue asked the next morning if she could go clubbing with us that night, I said no. But if she drove home quickly, packed, and came straight back, she could spend the day. She only left for an hour and stayed with us until Thursday afternoon. She needed to leave in time to prepare for your return the next day. When she left that afternoon, I was very happy. Justin and I just shared a wonderful, sensual week, and we shared a one-time experience with a very special woman. A woman who eagerly awaited the return of the one man she loved most. You, John. 2 months later, I found a pair of dirty panties that weren't mine. After not receiving a satisfactory explanation from Justin, I hired a private investigator. 2 weeks later, they confirmed his betrayal, and I asked them to collect as much evidence as possible. A few weeks later, looking through their initial photos, I was startled to see that the other woman was Sue. It didn't make sense to me. I knew Justin was capable of cheating, but from the way she spoke, I was sure Sue was deeply in love with you. So I asked the detectives to find out what they could about her. Where does she live? Where does he work? Is she after the money? Did her husband recognize her? Does he know what's going on? Have they separated? It took several months, but detectives were finally able to answer all but one of these questions. I still don't know why she did it. According to the report, whenever you went on a business trip for a week or longer, Sue saw Justin every day, always stopping the day before you returned. Some of these meetings lasted 30 minutes or less, but some lasted all day, and some lasted day and night. Given my early involvement in this situation, you would probably think that I would have agreed with this. Trust me, I don't. I loved that first week. It was wonderful for me as a woman and as a wife. But it was an experience we gave each other and shared with your Susan. What they have done since then has not included me, and therefore I find it unacceptable. Despite my anger at Justin, I realize that I still love him very much. He hurt me greatly, but I believe we will get through this as husband and wife. I'll run into him on Sunday, but I'm sure he'll choose to stay with me. The choice will be difficult for him, as I will demand my revenge, and it will include a lot of pain and a lot of humiliation. But it will be no more than what he made me experience. I have 4 reasons for writing this letter and providing you with evidence in the second envelope. The first is to let you know about the situation, because if I were you, I would want to know. The second is to provide you with all the necessary evidence if you decide to leave your wife. The third is to ask you to carefully consider whether your marriage is worth fighting for before you make any decisions. These goals have now been achieved. John, be very careful what you decide to do next. Make sure it's really what you want. My fourth reason behind all this is to ask for your forgiveness. I realize that my participation is inexcusable. I have no excuses. I know that what I did was wrong, and I accept that the pain and humiliation I face daily are a direct result of my own actions. You, on the other hand, are the innocent victim of our joint decisions. For this, I sincerely apologize and ask for your forgiveness. That's all I wanted to say. I don't know where you'll go from here, but my detectives have reported that you are a good and decent person. I trust you to make the right choice. Stella Holmes. After finishing reading Stella's letter, I stood up and took out a can of beer from the refrigerator, opened it, and drank it in 2 gulps. Not only was it refreshing, but it also gave me something to focus on as my thoughts started racing in different directions. Can I trust Stella? What woman would come up with such a thing? She must have the wrong Sue. Damn, Sue would never go to bed with those two. Years ago, when I shared my fantasy about the same thing, she freaked out, saying she would never share me and would never sleep with a woman because it was disgusting. So strong was her reaction that I never brought up the topic again. Damn, this is not right. Stella's detectives made a mistake with her husband. This is the only possible answer. Ironically, I had to take Stella's words at face value. I had to spend the afternoon thinking about my life with Sue and the future I wanted for us. Instead, I did exactly what she asked me not to do. I grabbed a bottle of Jack Daniels from the bar, took the second envelope, walked over to the couch and opened it. I should have listened to Stella. Inside was a thick private investigator's report detailing people, places, times, and sightings. That is, who did what and how much they liked it. But I didn't read it to the end. Instead, my attention was drawn to the 8x10 photos that fell into my hands. Each one was carefully dated and time-stamped. Each could be described as a high-definition image. And each, absolutely each of them, showed my wife. Although in the pictorial, the images depicted different dates and times, they all had several common characteristics. In none of the photographs could I see the man's face, but in each photograph I could see the wedding ring I had placed on Susan's finger. Seeing all these images broke my heart, but it was another common quality that brought me down. You see, in every photograph, the expression on my wife's face was one of pure and unadulterated joy. She was delighted. After that, I drank a little, but not as much as you might think. After a while, when all the photographs were laid out on the floor in front of me, I turned on the DVD. Watching this was truly disappointing. For the most part, the video wasn't as detailed or clear as the images. Besides, the shock value was no longer there. Yes, the video showed this bitch cheating in every possible way, but everything I felt watching it was empty. After a long time, I put everything back into the envelope and put it back on the dresser. Then I climbed onto the bed and started crying. I cried uncontrollably for a long time. At some point, a memory came to me of the last time I lay in that bed and felt terrible. I was a freshman and felt like crap because my girlfriend left me for a junior with a driver's license and an old car. Mom and Dad let me wallow in self-pity all day Saturday until they returned from church on Sunday. At this time, Dad came up to me and said, "That's enough, boy." He told me that life is hard and unfair, so don't be surprised when it kicks you in the butt every time. I remembered looking at him and asking what I could do to stop the pain. He grabbed my shirt and literally pulled me off the bed before answering. "Son, you have to accept that eventually the rains come. Sometimes they bring incredible harvests, and sometimes they cause floods. When there's a flood, all you can do is complain. It means you face the facts and do the best you can. Take care of yourself, take care of your family, and, if possible, help those less fortunate than you. You do this every time a storm comes into your life, and no matter the outcome, I will be proud to call you my son." A few minutes later, I was sitting at the dinner table drinking bottled water, trying to decide if my marriage could be saved. After an agonizing hour, I came to the conclusion that this was not the case. I could go through almost everything. It wouldn't be easy, but I really think that with her help, my love for her would get me through it. Unfortunately, there was one circumstance. Well, it wasn't really any one action on Sue's part, but rather the result of many. I knew that she had done with him several times what she had always denied me. Taken together, this meant that I would never be able to forgive her. I couldn't forgive her because she had given herself more fully to another man in the last 6 months than she had given herself to me in the last 15 years. Realizing that a difficult decision had been made, I began to think about how to approach the divorce. I knew I wanted to present it as a fait accompli rather than suffer through a long series of arguments and legal battles. So I took a blank piece of paper and started making a list of everything I would need to do. Find a lawyer, bank accounts, credit accounts, find a place to live, and protect as much of my assets as possible from divorce. Looking at the final list, I knew that I would need at least 2-3 months to be ready. As I drove home that evening, I began to worry about how I would convince Susan that everything would be okay for the next 3 months. In the midst of my anxiety, a thought occurred to me that made me let out a soft, ironic laugh. After walking another mile, I pulled over to the side of the road and added one more item to my to-do list: party plan. Laughing loudly, I put the car back into gear and got back on the road. The next 3 months were more than eventful. I coped by focusing on what was important, preparing for the divorce and life after it, maintaining a semblance of normalcy for Susan and the party. A week later, I managed to find a good lawyer. From the first meeting, I realized that he was exactly what I needed. I told him I was looking for a lawyer who could file a divorce based on Susan's infidelity and who could maximize my share of our marital property. I told him that after she receives the documents, I never want to see her again. He felt that this would create unnecessary complications, but I assured him that this was a requirement. Ultimately, I wanted him to find Mr. and Mrs. Holmes and sue them for breaking family ties. Stella was right, it was unforgivable, and I wanted my share of justice too. Before I left his office, he had made a significant advance, and I had an introduction to a financial advisor who specialized in preparing men for divorce. The first time I met with a new advisor, I presented him with a list of all my assets and liabilities, and he spent 40 minutes asking me questions. When we met a week later, he had very good news and a detailed plan to protect my assets. At the next meeting, I signed a power of attorney and instructed him to carry out the plan. This included closing my retirement accounts, transferring funds from joint to individual accounts, and moving funds overseas. Key to this plan was the sale of the family's lake home. It turned out his estimate was wrong, The house sold 45 days after going on the market, and the net price was almost 50% higher than his best-case scenario. Now I will never worry about my bills. My original plan was to set up a two-bedroom apartment to live in after I left Susan. But given my new financial plan, I decided a more drastic change of scenery would be in order. A week after the money from the house hit my account, I booked a cruise around the world on Queen Elizabeth II. An ocean view cabin with a balcony cost me $37,125, but I had always dreamed of going around the world, and I couldn't think of a better time. Key 2 departed from New York, and in 4 months I will be back in the same city. Unfortunately, the Key 2 did not set sail until 3 months after the party. It took me another week to plan for a pleasant wait for the cruise. As you might imagine, pretending that everything was normal was the hardest thing in the beginning. Starting the night I returned from the lake house, I had to consciously look into her eyes and smile. I think the only reason I made it through that first week was because of the sex. I refused her this, so whether she hated it or not, I didn't care anymore. I also tried to spend as little time at home as possible. My job always required travel, but with my age and position, I only needed to travel 1 week out of 6. However, over the next 3 months, I was on the road 3 out of 4 weeks and even started staying on weekends, something I hadn't done in a decade. When Susan asked why business travel was increasing so much, I told her that two had retired, and until we hired and trained replacements, I would be collecting a lot of bonus travel miles. As I turned away from her, I couldn't help but wonder if she would have asked the question if Mr. Holmes was still available. Over the course of 3 months, there were many nights when I was at home. Since I stopped trying to initiate sex with her after the first month, she took the initiative. But I couldn't do it. At first, she was very understanding, but then she started asking what was wrong. I chalked it all up to stress at work. After the 4th unsuccessful case, I told her that I would make an appointment with the doctor and we would find out if the pills were as good as people said. For the party, I rented a small banquet room at the International Hotel in Addison. I chose it because it was the right size for 60 people and because it had two 55-inch TVs on each of the 4 walls and a separate media control room on the 2nd floor. Invitations were sent to all of our friends and family to join me for a surprise party for my wife to celebrate our 15th anniversary. The invitation also stated that this was an adults-only party. 52 people confirmed their participation. I hope to make this an unforgettable evening for everyone. Our anniversary day arrived, and I woke my wife up with a gentle kiss on the cheek. As she started to get up, I said, "Happy anniversary," and placed the breakfast tray in her lap. Between sips of orange juice and small pieces of toast, she smiled and said, "You're such a good cook. I think I'll keep you as my husband for a while longer." Instead of telling her that she no longer had this option, I smiled back and told her to hurry up since the guests were soon to arrive and she needed to get dressed. An hour later, Susan was surprised when I let her best friend Allison in. She was even more surprised to see a limousine at the door. I pulled out a large bag from behind the chair and handed it to Susan. The bag was filled with gift wrap and Susan asked, "For me?" I kissed her on the cheek and said, "Yes, Susan, all for you." I then informed her that Allison would be joining her at the Golden Age Spa. She had a full day of self-care ahead of her. The only thing I asked was that she be dressed in the new clothes I just handed over and be ready by 6 p.m. At this time, the limousine will return for her, and Allison will bring her to me. After I assured her I wasn't kidding, she told me she loved me, kissed me, and walked out to the limo with Allison in front. 20 minutes after the limo left, a small moving truck pulled into my driveway. An hour later, everything I wanted to take with me was packed and sent for storage. It wasn't much, mostly photographs and memories from childhood, some tools and clothes. When it was done, I thought it was sad that after 15 years I wanted to leave so little. I arrived at the hotel at 5 p.m. and spent 15 minutes talking with Dave, the man who would be running the media booth. I gave him a CD of music that he could start playing at 5:30 p.m. and a DVD. I gave him $100 and told him that when he received my text message, he should start playing the DVD. I also warned him that at some point people might start yelling at him to turn it off. He said that for another $100, he would ensure that he was deaf until the end of the playback. Good boy, I said as I handed him another $100. By 6 p.m., everyone had arrived, and I personally thanked them for joining me on this special evening. Looking at all of them, I realized two things. First, that they were all members of Susan's family or friends of hers who became our family and friends. I realized that over the years I had focused my entire life on Susan and her world. I promised myself to never repeat this mistake. The second realization was that they were all good people, and I would miss them in my life. As befits her 15th anniversary, Sue wore a very short black dress studded with hundreds of Swarovski crystals, which glinted in the light and accentuated her plunging cleavage, highlighting her 36C breasts. 4-inch stilettos paired with a short skirt provided glimpses of her stocking tops as she moved. Looking at her, I saw that she was the most beautiful and sexy woman in the world, the only woman I've ever truly loved. When she entered the room, the meeting was greeted with a spontaneous outburst of applause and wishes from everyone who loved her. She was clearly surprised by the attention, so I gave her a minute to soak it all in before approaching her. After giving her a quick kiss, I turned her towards the tables and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, my wife of 15 years is Susan." For the next hour, I played the part of the happy husband, moving from table to table with Susan, thanking everyone for their participation. Later, after the food was eaten and the sweets were consumed, I got everyone's attention and gave Susan an anniversary gift. It was a 5-inch crystal heart hanging on a platinum chain. Putting it around her neck, I said that now she wears my heart. What she didn't know was that I ordered this heart especially for her. You know, crystal hearts are easy to find, but as I learned, it is very difficult to make one that has a significant crack in it, which is exactly what she now had. The heart she now carried was as broken as mine. Susan told the crowd that I kicked her out of the house so quickly this morning that she didn't have time to take my big anniversary gift with her. As she handed me a plain white envelope with the hotel logo on it, she told the crowd that it didn't mean she came to the party without a gift. As everyone watched, I pulled out a handwritten note from the envelope. "My dear John, you filled this day with wonderful surprises, so I hope my gift will be just as amazing for you. My anniversary gift is something I have always denied you. Tonight, when we return home, I will gladly give it to you. Love, Sue." After reading the note, I felt my face turn red. Everyone noticed and laughed, realizing that my wife had just given me a very naughty gift. Susan even laughed at my reaction. What they didn't realize was that I was blushing not from embarrassment, but from anger. Here she is, on our anniversary, offering me a gift that she no longer values. What she offered me was a second-hand gift that someone else had already used until he got tired of it. I supported the misconceptions of others and, smiling, pretended to carefully fold the note and put it in a safe place. Everyone also appreciated this, as it caused a new burst of laughter and exclamations. When my watch showed 20:40, Susan was sitting at a table in the main part of the room, chatting happily with 3 of her friends, while I paid respects to her aunt and uncle, who were sitting very close to the exit. At 8:45 p.m., I left the ballroom and exited through the back entrance of the hotel. I sat in the back seat of the limousine and turned on the laptop that was waiting for me. Once connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, I sent Dave a text message instructing him to start playing the DVD. Sitting in the limousine, I watched as the video camera in the media control room beamed images onto my screen in real time. My only goal at this party was to show this video. After all the time and money spent organizing this event, I was determined to see its impact. It began with an empty champagne glass, a single clink sounding from it as a silver knife lightly tapped its sides. "Attention, please. I request your attention for a moment." My voice boomed through the room's sound system. After a brief pause, my voice continued. I had to leave the room for a moment, but that's okay, because I left my virtual self here to provide this dedication to my beautiful wife, Susan. I watched as everyone sat down and stared at the nearby screen. As you all know, 15 years ago today, Susan took me as her husband, and I took her as my wife. At that time, I thought I was the happiest person in the world. I suspect you still see me like that. As my voice continued to sound, images of the first 14 years of our marriage appeared and merged on the screens. For the first 14 years, Susan helped me become a better man and a better husband. Together, we learned what makes each other sad and what we can do to make each other laugh. For better and for worse, for richer and poorer, for sickness and in health, Susan was there for me, to the exclusion of all others. She was my perfect complement, my partner, my best friend, and my lover. Besides her love, she gave me many gifts during those first 14 years, but there were two that I always valued the most. As I continued to speak, the screens showed corresponding images. The first of these gifts was my wedding ring. Since she stood at the altar and placed it on my finger, I have worn it proudly every day. I confess to you that with all the travel required by my job, there have been many lonely nights, and more than once I was offered the comfort of a temporary companion. But I always refused, not because my needs were less than those of other men, but because this ring was a constant reminder that everything I needed was waiting for me at home, when I'll come back. The second most memorable gift was a Mont Blanc pen. Susan gave it to me for our 10th anniversary. She told me that she had ordered it the year before and that it was a unique thing. If you look closely, you will see that instead of one floating, the diamond that is usually at the top of this model has two stones suspended so that they look like they are facing each other. My stone is a heliotrope, and below it is an emerald stone, Susan. I loved this pen from the first one. I loved it for its uniqueness, but most of all for the love that went into its design and making. Over the past 5 years, I can honestly say that every time I used this pen, I thought of the woman who gave it to me, and how much it means to me. Again, a champagne glass appeared on the screens. This time it was being filled. My fingers grabbed the stem and began to lift it out of sight while my voice continued to sound through the speakers. Join me in a toast to my wife, Susan, who showed me what love can be. The screens showed how the empty glass was lowered back onto the table. I've just shared with you my special memories of the first 14 years of my marriage to Susan. But today is our 15th anniversary, and I have to tell you that this year has been the most amazing year ever. Susan has given me 2 more this year. Gifts that I will never forget, and I would like to share them with you now. The first was the gift of surprise and amazement. The second gift she gave me this year was this one. An ancient Viking helmet appeared on the screen. You see, this year my loving wife gave me horns to wear. As you all can see, they were big and heavy. At this point, I saw the older men in the crowd suddenly become more interested, although most still did not understand what was going on. After much thought, I decided that these horns are too heavy for me. So, everyone in the ballroom watched as the horns were filed down one by one on the monitors. Finally, only the mutilated helmet remained on the screens. Everyone here has been a good friend to Susan and I. We have all shared many happy moments over the years. To Susan, whom I loved with all my heart, and to all of you, I hope that your life will be full of happiness, that satisfaction will be your constant companion. Susan, and to all our friends, I say with sadness in my heart, via con Dios. As the screens went dark, I watched as a lone figure stood up and walked toward Susan. I saw him speak to her, and after she confirmed her identity, I saw him take out 2 plastic bags from his pocket, which he placed in front of her. The first contained the remains of a destroyed Mont Blanc pen. I watched as she picked up the second bag, trying to figure out what it was. From her reaction, I understood the moment when she found out that these were 4 separate parts of my wedding ring. I smiled at the thought that no one noticed it was missing from my hand. Finally, the man took an envelope from his pocket and told her that she had officially received the divorce papers. As I continued to watch him quickly walk towards the exit, Susan followed him, shouting after him as the monitors came back on. My final narrative was brief and stern. Dark, what would you do if this were your wife or your husband? And with that, raw images of Justin Holmes and Susan appeared on the screens. Focusing on Susan's reaction, I think she finally realized how much I appreciated her anniversary gift, because when she saw the close-up picture of herself, she fell to the floor. The party was everything I had hoped for, so I closed my laptop. 30 minutes later, I tipped the driver and entered DFW Airport's Terminal C. An hour and 3 glasses of whiskey later, I was in the air. I spent the next 3 months in the Florida Keys, where I rented a beach house and spent every day in or under the water. The 4 months I spent on Key 2 were great and worth every penny. Watching the world on TV is one thing, but it doesn't compare to seeing its wonders with your own eyes. As for the companions, an unusually large percentage of the passengers turned out to be fascinating people, and they made every meal worth sharing. And while there were few single women on board, there were even fewer single men, so I always had company at lunch or on the dance floor or when I went ashore. In those 7 months, my divorce was finalized, and, thanks to excellent legal and financial advice, I was able to retain most of our previously joint assets. Of course, photos and videos helped too. There were 2 surprises during this time. The first was that Stella and Justin settled my claim for $500,000. The second occurred 5 months after the party. My lawyer contacted me and told me that Susan would agree to all of our terms, but only if she could talk to me face to face. The lawyer strongly recommended that I do this. I objected, saying that I would not meet her, but I would agree to a 15-minute video call. So on the appointed day, I found myself in the ship's conference room, looking at Susan for the last time. After she said hi, I deliberately started the timer on my watch and said, "You have 15 minutes." She spent 10 of them explaining how it was a big mistake, how stupid she was, and how it would never happen again. I just stared at the screen, remembering how her lips tasted, how much she loved to kiss, and how much I miss her. She spent the remaining 5 minutes begging me to come home. When her time was up, I asked my lawyer if I had fulfilled my obligations. He exchanged glances with Susan's lawyer, then said, "Yes, John, you complied." "Okay," I said. Then I looked straight into the camera, knowing that to Susan it looked like I was looking straight at her. "Susan, I gave you everything I had, and I thought you gave me everything in return. But when I saw you with my lover, I realized that I never had you all. Seeing you together made me realize that you shared more with him than you ever shared with me." After a short pause, I continued, "Susan, I have spent my entire professional career negotiating agreements, and one of the reasons for my success is that I have always tried to create fair agreements. I have always looked for a contractual relationship where both parties received as much value as they put in. Knowing this, do you really think I could accept a relationship where I gave everything and my partner gave less of the same?" She lowered her head and shook her head. Rising from the chair, I said, "Me too." Raising her head, she asked, "John, why did you stop calling me Sue after all these years?" From the air tom, I sat down again so she could see my face and replied, "Sue was the wife who was waiting for me at home. She was the one who rejoiced in being my companion and my mistress. Susan is a cheater." When I saw tears running down her cheeks, I stood up, saying, "Goodbye, Susan, and Sue, goodbye to the world. Goodbye, my love."